Today's video, we're going to be replacing this compressor. Here I already pulled the disconnect. Obviously, as I was troubleshooting the compressor, I'm going to put the disconnect back in, and you can almost hear when the compressor starts almost like a grinding, whining noise. And that indicates to me that we are having issues with this compressor that's starting to fail. It'll run for a few minutes, then it will overheat and then lock up. Obviously, when you're working on your condensing unit, you want to go through the basics. I've already connected my gauges, so I do see here that I do have refrigerant in the system. I also inspected my components, and I could see here when we remove our panel, somebody replaced the capacitor and they also added a hard start. This indicates to me that this compressor was already starting to fail or struggling to start, and the capacitor was replaced. Possibly the system was still struggling and then someone added a hard start. Here, after a few minutes, the compressor does shut off. We're going to start our prep of removing the compressor. Pull your disconnect, and this will remove any power to your condensing unit. We're going to remove the fan motor. Depending on the make and model of your condensing unit, this may vary. This one just has some screws that are holding the top. We're going to take that and we're going to remove it, and we're going to push it somewhere to the side where we can have access to the compressor. Make sure that you clean the excess debris that's inside. When using your torches, you don't want any of this to catch fire. Remove our terminals here and our harness. My hose, I'm just going to wash down the interior, see if I can get rid of all this soot and all this excess debris. You don't have to put your hose on full blast, just enough that you can kind of just fill it with water. Now we're going to do a proper recovery. I do have a link on my channel showing you how to do this. You want to make sure before you remove your old compressor that you remove any refrigerant that's in the system. We're going to remove our schrader valve. We're going to do this on our high and our low side. Now I'm going to use some of this cool gel. It's just a heat barrier spray. I like to use it just to protect my system. So right here, I'll be spraying it at this connection. I like to be pretty liberal with it. If you don't have this spray, you can just use a wet rag. Just soak it up pretty nice and then wrap it around the pipe. Here we're going to spray our king valves. Just make sure that you don't spray it inside of your port right here. You want to be careful not to allow anything to contaminate your system. So when you spray it, just spray it here up top where your service cap is. Inside of your king valve, you have a gasket right inside of here, so we want to protect that. And we're going to do this on both sides. I like to put a rag around it just as a secondary safety precaution. I have another rag. It's not wet, it's damp. And I'm basically going to put it over here, over the electrical wiring. The reason I'm doing this is because a lot of times you have the torch, it's 110 degrees outside, and many times you're kind of have sweat in your eyes, and you're trying to move the torch, and sometimes you'll move it and you may accidentally hit the wiring. I mean, we're just going to protect it just to make sure that if anything does happen, that we have some type of protection over our wires. Now we're going to remove our bolts that secure our compressor to the condensing unit. just make sure that you have your extensions, especially usually like on these back bolts, they're more difficult, and you need to just make sure that you have enough play to get over the compressor. Prep so we can use our torches. Make sure you have your safety gloves on and also some safety glasses. You want to just take safety precautions to protect yourself. Setting up your connection here to remove your compressor, you want to make sure that you have something to kind of help you as you're heating it up to kind of remove it. So some people like to use a channel lock. They'll wrap the channel lock around here, and as they're heating it up, they'll just keep pulling and tugging slightly. You don't have to be too abrasive and it will pop out. Some people kind of like to use a hammer, so while they're heating it up, they're just kind of tugging slowly and pulling upwards to remove the connection once it melts off. Your torches, you don't want to sit in one spot. What you'll do is you'll just kind of go back and forth over your connection, using a nice slow side-to-side motion. You don't want to stay in one spot because you could just make a hole and just cause just some extra work for you to do. So just nice and slowly let it heat up. Take your time. The flame doesn't have to be too high, and you'll do this on both your low and your high side as well on both of your connections. You can see the silver slowly starting to melt. Now we're going to start on our high side. Just be very careful. You're going to be more of in a confined area, especially since it's in the lower section. So just take your time, be patient, and it'll come right out. Here we're doing the same thing. When you look at our condensing unit, it does not have a filter dryer installed. So we're going to go ahead and install this. You always want to make sure that you're protecting your system, especially when you're putting in a new compressor. So if you have one that's there, remove it, put a new one. If it doesn't have it, put one in. Not sure how to install your filter dryer or replace it? I do have a video posted on my channel showing you how to do that step by step. We have our filter dryer installed. We're going to start here prepping for our compressor. Now we're basically taking our sandpaper, just cleaning up our connections both on our low and our high side. I am using 120 grit sandpaper. You can use 180, it's just a little more abrasive. I just feel more comfortable using the 120. You do have to use a little more effort, but it does give you a nice clean smooth surface. So once you finish sanding both sides, what you'll want to do is take a rag and then we'll wipe them. It doesn't have to be saturated, it's just nice and damp. We're just cleaning our connections. Here I resprayed my connections, and again, this is just a safety precaution. If you don't have this, you can use a wet rag and just wrap it around. I'm just putting some up here, and I also resprayed my king valves like I did earlier in the video, and I wrapped it with a wet rag. Getting your replacement compressor, make sure that you take the model number down, or you just take a picture and bring it with you when you go to get your replacement. You want to try to get the exact same design model. It's just better for having to put your copper pipes in, and as well as your electrical components. What happens is you may get a cheaper deal on a replacement, like this is a Bristol. You may get another brand that you can put inside, but usually you'll have to alter the piping coming back in, as well as having to replace the electrical components that go into the compressor. So here we have the exact replacement that we needed. Now, the way I like to install the new compressor is right here. You can see this notch. I just like to take my hammer inside, and then I'll use it as a lift mechanism, and I'll just lift it and just drop it in without having to cut my hands in the process. Here you can see your compressor just kind of comes bare. They do give you these little rubber footings and metal inserts, and basically you're just going to pop it right in. You can see I did one here already, and once you do that, the little metal insert just goes right inside. And this is just so when you're tightening your bolts, you don't over torque it. Try not to flip your compressor because there are oils inside of your compressor. Also going to remove our cap to our terminal. Just gonna have two plugs, one on your low and one on your high. Just remove those plugs. Here we dry fit our connections, just make sure they slide nice and in. Sometimes if it doesn't go in smoothly, you'll have to sand down your connections a little more, and then just make sure that your bolts will line up when you secure your compressor. We're going to secure our compressor to the condensing unit. We are going to have to use the bolts that we removed initially. The new compressor does not come with bolts. Make sure you secure all four sides. Take my heat barrier spray, and I'm going to spray right here just along the connections of my new compressor, both on my high and my low side. And the reason I'm doing this is because I've seen this happen a lot on the field, especially with inexperienced technicians and some who are experienced, where they heat up so much that this will actually break loose. So you want to be careful, and you want to use whatever safety measures that are necessary just to prevent you having to do any extra work. If you don't have the spray, you can take a wet rag and just wrap it around. I'm going to take this rag and I'm just going to put it right over my compressor. It is a little wet. You can see here it's not dripping wet, but it does have some moisture to it. We're ready to start making our connections. Again, as I said, when you have your torch, just go slow, back and forth. Don't stay in one spot. Just go heat up. You're just trying to heat up the connections so that when you apply the silver, it'll literally just melt when it touches it. And we're going to do this on both sides. Make sure your flame is not too much. Just set it just enough, just right, so that you're able to heat up your connections. You're wearing your gloves and your safety goggles. While we're brazing in our connections, we are going to be running nitrogen through the system. It's just to make sure that the lines inside stay nice and clean and free of contamination. Here is a special regulator that allows you to push nitrogen into the system while you're brazing. So here you'll turn it on, and this will allow you to adjust your pressure. So here you can see the ball will tell you how high you're going, and I want it here right at 5. I don't need too much. Some people like to use 7 or 10, but I mean even 7 will suffice. You just want to use enough nitrogen in the system so that you can make your connections. I'm heating up my connections. I like to just bend the silver and actually just tap the bottom as I'm doing it, and this will just allow it to melt. The hardest part is always going to be the bottom, so that's where I like to start. So as I'm heating up the pipe, I'm just tapping it up here. Once I see that it melts, I'll actually start from the bottom up. The connections cool off for a couple of minutes, and then I take my rag and kind of wipe my lines down and then inspect my connections. I'm going to connect my harness. Just make sure that your disconnect is pulled. Because I purchased the same model that was in here, I'm able to use the same harness that was on my old compressor. I put my cap back on. This is just to protect our wires, and then we're going to secure it with this latch. Here, if you remember, we had a hard start and a capacitor. I'm going to remove the hard start, and I'm also going to replace the capacitor. Removed our nitrogen, so now we're going to replace our schrader valves with new schrader valves, and then we're going to pull a vacuum on the system. We're ready to pull our vacuum. If you don't know how to pull a vacuum, I do have a video posted on my channel. It's pretty simple. We have our gauges connected to our high and low side. We have the vacuum plugged in. And now we're basically just going to turn it on. Now we're going to open our low and our high side. We're going to be using our gauges as our metering device. Vacuum run for half an hour. Close your low and your high side. Vacuum off. And let it sit for about an hour, just to ensure that we keep our vacuum and that we do not have a leak. When you're vacuuming, you're going to have some extra time. I just choose to keep myself busy. So here, I removed the old insulation on my line and just re-insulated it. and then use my pipe tape to just kind of secure it. I'm looking at my gauges. My pin has not moved, so that's a good sign that we do not have a leak. Now I'm going to recharge the unit. Depending on the type of system and refrigerant, the process is going to change. I do have videos posted on my channel how to charge your system. So basically the most important thing you want to do is we already pulled the vacuum, we removed any contaminants or condensables. You want to make sure that you open your tank, your hose is already connected, your high and your low side, are closed on your gauges, and you want to purge out the line of any air. This video was a help. If it was informational, please subscribe.